This video that we're getting ready to watch right now is going to deal specifically with congressional elections. We're going to talk a little bit about how members of the House and members of the U.S. Senate are elected. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the advantages that current members of Congress hold when it comes time for re-election. And then we're going to talk about the subject of money in political contests. And while we're talking specifically about congressional elections here, we're going to talk about the differences between soft money and hard money. And those differences apply whether we're talking about the presidential election or the congressional election. So let's get started here and talk a little bit about the differences in how members of the House of Representatives and members of the Senate are elected. The very first thing we need to look at when we compare elections in the U.S. Senate to those in the U.S. House of Representatives is that we need to keep in mind that the members of the U.S. Senate were originally, according to the Constitution as written in 1789, indirectly elected, which meant in most cases the people of a state would elect the members of their state legislature, and then it would be those members of the state legislature that would decide who would represent that state in the United States Senate. So there was an indirect process of selecting U.S. senators. But with the 17th Amendment, we have the direct election of U.S. senators. So today, when we go in and cast a vote for Claire McCaskill or for Mark Kirk or for, whoever we're going to vote for U.S. Senate, we are directly electing or voting for that person. Now, the United States House of Representatives, on the other hand, as we've also talked about, has always been directly elected. It is the only position within the federal government that the U.S. Constitution originally set up to allow the masses to directly elect. Understand, though, today, both members of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives are both directly elected. Now let's take a little bit closer look at election for U.S. senators. As we know, there are currently 100 members of the U.S. Senate, 2 from each state. You need to understand that each U.S. senator is elected for a total of 6 years. But we do need to keep in mind that when we have an election, only 1/3 of the Senate is ever up for re-election at the same time. What we have is every 2 years in this country we have congressional elections. Remember, the Congress is made up of both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. So every 2 years we have congressional elections. But every 2 years only 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. And that's where we get the phrase Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3 senators. When a senator is elected, that senator is assigned a class, and that senator keeps that class throughout their term in office. And even if they lose to another person, the next person that comes along will assume the same class that that senator had. So in other words, if I'm a Class 1 senator and I'm elected this year in 2012, that means that I will not be up for re-election until 2018. 2 years from now, Class 2 will be elected, and 2 years after them, Class 3 will be elected. Again, the passage of the 17th Amendment in 1913 caused senators to be directly elected. And to be a member of the U.S. Senate, you must be at least 30 years old. Now, when we look at elections for members of the House of Representatives, it's slightly different. There are currently 435 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. As we remember from the first, couple weeks of class, each state has a different number of representatives in the House of Representatives, and that number is based on their population. Members of the U.S. House of Representatives are up for re-election every 2 years, and every 2 years, all 435 of them are up for re-election at the same time. So while we can only re-elect 1/3 of the Senate at any given time, Theoretically, we could throw out all 435 members of the U.S. House of Representatives and vote in a brand new set of members of the U.S. House of Representatives every 2 years. Members of the U.S. House of Representatives have always been directly elected, and in order to be a member of the United States House of Representatives, you must be 25 years old. All of these are some very basic requirements and explanations of how we elect members of the House and the Senate. Now, as we talk about congressional elections, there's a few terms that you need to be familiar with. And the first term is incumbent. A person that is an incumbent is a person that currently holds the office which is up for election. So right now, if I live in the 8th Congressional District of Missouri, Joanne Emerson is the current member of the U.S. House of Representatives for Missouri's 8th Congressional District, so therefore Joanne Emerson is the incumbent. Another term you need to be familiar with is an open seat. When we talk about elections or congressional elections, if there is no incumbent, if the person who was the incumbent dies or chooses not to run for re-election, or maybe they've been elected to a higher office, then that seat is considered to be what's called an open seat. There is no incumbent. And we'll take a look and see how an open seat is a different type of election, because in an open seat there is no incumbent, and we'll find out that incumbents have a huge advantage. So if you have a seat that's up for election and there's no incumbent, technically it's an open seat and nobody has the advantage of incumbency. And those open seat races tend to be seats that both the media and the political parties tend to focus more on. And the final term that I want you to be familiar with when it comes to congressional elections is the idea of a safe seat. A safe seat is a congressional seat that we pretty much know which party is going to win the election every time. The 8th Congressional District right now is considered a safe seat for Joanne Emerson because she's the incumbent. But if Joanne Emerson was choose not to run for re-election, the 8th Congressional District seat would then become an open seat because there's no incumbent. But the 8th Congressional House District in the state of Missouri is also what we call a Republican safe seat, because even if Joanne Emerson chose not to run again, we could pretty easily, or we could pretty accurately make the prediction that a Republican is going to win that seat. And generally, a safe seat is a seat that year after year elects a member of the same party. There are some districts in the United States that are very much safe seats. There are certain districts in St. Louis, that's an urban setting, that tends to be dominated by the Democrats. So we pretty much know that the congressional seat from the St. Louis or the Kansas City areas are going to be held by Democrats. Now, on the other hand, most of the rural districts in Missouri tend to be Republican districts, and we pretty much know that most of the rural congressional districts in Missouri are going to be held by Republicans. So understand the difference between an incumbent, an open seat, and a safe seat. Now, continuing to look at these terms, incumbent, open seat, and safe seat, you need to keep a couple things in mind. You need to realize that there are very few open seats in congressional elections. Generally, members of Congress that get a seat will continue to run for that seat for years. We have examples of U.S. senators serving in the U.S. Senate until they're beyond 100 years old. Some members of the Senate have served for more than 50 years. You have members of the House of Representatives who have been there 25, 30, 40 years. Okay? So it's relatively unusual to have an open seat. So when open seats come along, especially in districts that are not necessarily safe districts, those open seat elections become very, very important to the political parties, and therefore the media really focuses on them. Now, the reason we have so few open seats is because most incumbents choose to run for re-election. You get a job in Congress and you want to stay there for a while. Now, keeping this in mind, that individuals who get elected to Congress run for re-election often, we need to look at this next slide, and this next slide shows how we as Americans feel about the job that Congress is doing. Every couple of weeks there is a public opinion survey conducted in which the American people are simply asked the question, do you have confidence in the job that Congress is doing? And you will see by this slide on the screen, or this graph on the screen, that for many years the American people have had a very low level of confidence in Congress. Most of these times you've got 70%, 60%, usually better than 50% of the population saying that they do not approve of the job that Congress is doing. And when we look at this and we see that the American population generally does not like the job that Congress is doing, we would expect that members of Congress would oftentimes lose when they decide to run for re-election. But as we'll see right now, members of Congress who choose to run have a very high success rate. Since World War II, approximately 92% of all members of the House of Representatives that have run for re-election win. And if you're an incumbent in the U.S. Senate and you choose to run for re-election, you're going to win about 78% of the time. So I'm sure if we were to average those together, we could very, very safely say that roughly 85% of the time, an incumbent who chooses to run for re-election is going to win. Now, I don't know about you, but if I knew that roughly 85% of the time I was going to be successful when I attempted to do something, I would think that's a pretty good rate. Now, we'll just kind of take a step back to the previous slide that we just had. The previous slide said that for many years now, more than 50% of the American population has disapproved of the job that Congress was doing. And if the majority of the American people think Congress is doing a bad job, how can it be that 85% of the time those members of Congress are getting reelected? What we have to realize here is that we as Americans don't get to elect Congress. We as Americans get to elect 3 members of Congress. The only person that I can vote for is my member of the House of Representatives and the 2 U.S. senators that represent me. So when we ask the American people the question that previous graph posed, how do you feel Congress as a whole is doing? We as Americans overwhelmingly say Congress as a whole is doing a bad job. But when we look at the public opinion survey, when we ask the American people, how do you feel that your members of Congress are doing, we see very quickly those numbers are reversed. That an overwhelming number of Americans believe that their members of Congress are doing a good job, while a very small number, less than 40%, think that their member of Congress is doing a bad job. So the problem we have here is that Congress works for the whole country, but Congress is made up of people that are elected from local districts. Congress is doing a bad job, but my member of Congress is doing a good job. And the reason I think my member of Congress is doing a good job is because my member of Congress is working for me and doing what I want him to do. So when Congress passes a budget that provides $500,000 for Cape Girardeau to build a new public swimming pool, people who live in that district that are getting the $500,000 for the new swimming pool think that $500,000 is a wonderful thing, and we reelect our member of Congress who helped us get that $500,000. But if I live in a district, one of the other 434 districts outside of the district that got the swimming pool, we think that that $500,000 was a waste because that money was spent in a different district. Best way for a member of Congress to get reelected is to keep their members happy. It's very difficult for us to make major changes to Congress because I think the members of Congress that I have control over are doing a good job. All of those members of Congress that are doing a bad job, I have no control over them. And even if I think my members of Congress are doing a bad job and I want to throw my members of Congress out, I'm only throwing 3 members of Congress out. There are still 532 members of Congress that I can't control, I can't get rid of. So the structure of our national legislature, the structure of Congress, makes it very difficult for us as Americans to have a lot of influence on the decisions that Congress makes. We can influence our individual congressmen, but it's difficult for me as an American citizen to have a lot of impact on Congress as a whole. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about as far as elections go is the impact that money has on elections. When we look at elections and we talk to people about what problems are there with the election system in the United States, one of the biggest things we talk about is that money has too much influence. And I'm not going to argue that money has too much influence or money doesn't. But what I want you to understand after watching this video is how does money have an impact on elections? There are 2 basic types of money that we talk about when we talk about elections in this country. You've got hard money and soft money. And basically what hard money is money that is given to a specific candidate by an individual or an organization, and that money is designed to help that particular candidate get elected. If I think that Rick Santorum is the best candidate to be President of the United States, and I give Rick Santorum $500 to help get him elected, that's called hard money. There are limits on how much hard money an individual or an organization can give to a candidate or to a campaign. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. We can look at the fact that I gave Rick Santorum $5,000, and then maybe later on, if Rick Santorum voted for a piece of legislation that really, really helped me, then we could make a legitimate argument that I gave money to Rick Santorum, and maybe Rick Santorum returned the favor by voting for a piece of legislation that benefited me. The second type of money that we talk about, and that a lot of people today think is the real problem, is what we call soft money. Soft money is money that is not given directly to a candidate or to a campaign, but rather soft money is money that is spent by an organization or an individual that benefits a campaign or benefits a candidate, but it is not given directly to the candidate, and it's spent without coordination with the candidate. Let me try to explain that to you. Hard money would be money that I give to somebody like Rick Santorum. He turns around and takes that money and creates an ad that's run on television. That's hard money. That money is spent for an ad that specifically says, vote for Rick Santorum, and Rick Santorum or any candidate says, I'm endorsing this message. Soft money, on the other hand, is money that is spent by an individual and organization that may be used to support a candidate, but is not spent by that candidate, and that candidate has not coordinated with the individual organization spending the money. I'm going to show you a couple of video clips here, real short video clips of political ads. Some of them are examples of hard money being spent, and some of them are examples of soft money being spent. And the problem with soft money is that there's no limit on how much soft money can be spent. If I want to spend $1 billion of my money trying to get Mickey Mouse elected President of the United States, as long as I don't directly work with Mickey Mouse or his campaign, I can spend as much money as I want trying to encourage people to vote for Mickey Mouse. In today's political environment, in today's presidential election that's going on right now, we're hearing a lot about super PACs, these political action committees that are spending a lot of money endorsing one candidate or another, but they're not doing this spending in conjunction with the candidate. The candidate is not endorsing or approving what they're doing. They're just doing that because they as an organization think that their candidate is the best one. Let me show you a couple of videos here that will try and demonstrate the difference between hard money and soft money when it comes to campaign ads.
I'm Michelle Bachmann, candidate for president, and I approve this message.
I'm Tim Pawlenty, and I approve this message.
Flip-flopping on issues. Check the facts at newfacts.com. Restore Our Future Inc. is responsible for the content of this message.
Foreign policy that's based not just on military might, but also the quality of our moral character as a nation. That's something we believe.
Hopefully those video clips that I showed you kind of demonstrated the difference between hard money, and the hard money videos are the ones that you heard the candidate saying at the end of them, I am Michelle Bachmann, I endorse this message, or I am Paul Whitney and I endorse this message. Those are the hard money ads. The other ads that we saw, the ones that were talking about Newt Gingrich flip-flopping, if you notice the end of that video, there was a organization that said we've paid for that. And nowhere in that ad did it say vote for Mitt Romney or vote for Santorum. It just simply said don't vote for Newt Gingrich. Or the ad that dealt with, draftobama.org. That wasn't an organization that Obama put together that he was, in conjunction with them creating that ad. No, that was a group of people who wanted Obama to run for president, and they put together that ad, and they ran it. That would be an example of soft money. Now, when we look at hard money, we need to realize that there are limits. As we look on this screen shows that the Federal Election Commission has limits on spending that they enforce. The Federal Election Commission is created by congressional statute, and Congress passes laws saying there are certain limits on how much money an individual can spend. Or let me rephrase that, there's a limit on how much hard money an individual can spend, and on the screen you see the limits that are placed on each group. Now, on the other hand, when we look at soft money, we realize that soft money is unlimited. If I've got $1 billion and I want to run attack ads saying that, Obama is the worst president we've ever had, and I just want to keep it in the minds of the American people that Obama was a bad president, I could spend all of that money. And as long as I'm not coordinating with any candidate running against Obama or any political party that's running against Obama, I can spend as much money as I want. The debate today is whether or not these unlimited soft money expenditures are fair and whether or not there is truly a separation between candidates that are running against Obama and these, what they're calling super PACs that are spending all of this money. There's quite a debate in this country going on right now, not on whether or not money impacts our elections, because it does. The real debate is, should we limit the amount of money organizations can spend in either soft money expenditures or hard money expenditures? Because there are a group of people that are saying, hey, it's my money, I should be able to spend it how I want. If you're telling me I can't spend my money running an ad supporting this candidate or opposing that candidate, then you're violating my freedom of speech. Very interesting question. Now, what we're going to look at for the rest of the videos in this chapter are going to shift from the election process of Congress, and we're going to start looking at how the President of the United States is nominated and how the President is elected. There are 2 more videos you need to watch. One video deals with the nomination process of the President of the United States, and then the second video you need to watch deals with the general election process.